So as you're greeting here, you're in the right place. You're in the 1 p.m. Eastern Time CE course hosted by CareStack and Darby on ransomware readiness. We'll get started here in a moment.
All right, well, welcome everybody. I appreciate the time. No doubt, this is certainly an interesting time for ransomware and really for the awareness around it. As mentioned before, things like the Capital Pipeline attack, and most recently, for anybody who's a steak lover out there, one of the largest meat packing producers in the United States was just hit, and they are currently down. So I'm not sure what that means for a shortage, but it's just day by day, we kind of see these things come through. So, and yeah, those are the big ones, but you know, healthcare is really the target that, that is at the forefront right now. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're really going to cover things that are very easy to do in your office, that don't require a ton of investment, that really just require more training and more awareness around this topic and some things that you can do. So I do appreciate everybody's time. I promise it's not super technical, it's more layman's, and let's get started. So we're going to cover a couple of things. Basically, what is ransomware? Why should I worry about it? How an attack can affect my practice, and not only how it can, but how do they happen? You know, what's the, and hopefully we get some questions, but how do these things often happen? How can you in your office and really your staff recognize the threat? Because that's going to be how we're going to battle this on the forefront. What do you do if you do have an infection? And we're going to really talk about planning and really talk about being prepared for something like this. And then what are the ways I can protect myself in the future starting tomorrow? So we're going to cover a couple of things, and I think there's some good stuff in here. So first, what is ransomware and why should I worry about it? Essentially, let's start from a HIPAA standpoint and start what your practice is required to do. As from a HIPAA standpoint, you are required to have enterprise level antivirus and anti-malware. Now, what I mean by enterprise level is something that is paid for, something that is monitored, and something other than maybe a free version that comes with a PC when you buy it. So, and your IT provider can certainly help you with that. Enterprise level firewall, and I have in parentheses, not provider based. So whether you have Comcast or whether you have Verizon or Optimum, they are going to give you a router and or a device that's going to bring internet into your building. That device does have a firewall in it, but from a HIPAA standpoint, that is not considered an adequate firewall. And if there is a breach, that will result in steeper fines for you. So you must have an independent hardware enterprise level firewall. Enterprise level backups, cloud and local. So there are many different versions of backups, and we're going to get into those and ways to do it, and ways not to do it, more importantly. But when we say enterprise level, so you know, are we checking those things? Are we making sure where they're located? And we're going to get into that. You definitely need a trained staff. Not only from an actual training, but from an actual documented training point. You want to have something on record that said that your staff was trained, they understand the risks, and they understand how to recognize these things. You really should have dedicated passwords for each staff member. If not at the Windows login point, or if not at the practice management login point, then definitely at the Windows login point. And you should be able to change those and remove those and disable those at will and have a process to do it. You definitely need all of your patching and updates. So your Windows updates, your practice management updates, really anything that is inside of your network, whether it's your firewall or your imaging software. There are constantly patches and constantly vulnerabilities that are discovered. And Windows is always releasing patches to fix those things. If your patching is not fixed, you can have the greatest firewall in the world. It's not going to stop a security hole. And then finally, and the one that most people don't really know, is you're supposed to have on file a monthly report of all the remediation that was done across the month. So any virus definitions that were updated, any Windows patches that were updated, any firewall patching that was updated, you should know the health of your system. You should really be ahead, and you can produce a report like this in case something happens. So any questions on this slide before we move on?
Rick, I think what we'll do is we'll take questions at the end. I think it's a better strategy just with the way, and just encourage the audience to ask questions. If
Absolutely.
it's really appropriate, I'll interject, but I don't want to, I want to keep you going.
You got it. Okay, great. So what exactly is ransomware? In its simplest form, it's when basically somebody is able to get into your network and provide or deploy encryption on all of the data attached to your network, whether it's your local PCs, backup drives, in some cases cloud backup drives, your server, anything that is connected to your network gets encrypted, and you will not get the decryption key until a ransom has been paid. Simplest form. They're going to hold you hostage until you pay a ransom. So I think the biggest thing to understand is that the reason that medical is so attractive, there are a number of reasons, but there are a reason that dental is particularly attractive. Number one, most dental offices are a very complex environment, meaning there are not just Windows-based systems, there are practice management-based systems. There are systems based around a CBCT. There are systems based around other software that you might use, maybe external software or patient communication software. And since there are so many moving parts of these offices, there's really a lot that needs to be maintained. There's a lot from a software standpoint, there's a lot from a hardware standpoint, there's a lot from a patching standpoint. And if you're not on top of these things, and people in this industry know that, you're essentially a good target, because chances are there's going to be something in your office that isn't patched, or that there's a hole that can be exploited. You're also considered a high value target because, well, you're a doctor and you have money, you're going to pay, and your practice, your information is critical to your daily your daily interaction. So it's necessary. Nice thing about what you guys do is you have everything possible for an identity thief or somebody to steal. You have social security numbers, names, phone numbers, addresses, history, all the things I need to get that info on the dark web and sell it. From a technology standpoint, there is probably a new school and old school of thought. And you know, we've certainly encountered some dentists that feel that maybe tech isn't that important, or even you know, just that I either have somebody that can do it or I know somebody that can do it. And bad actors rely on this information, and bad actors rely on the fact that, yeah, you might have a guy, or maybe you have a patient, and you trade off services for them. But unless you really have somebody that can devote 100% of their time to making sure that your systems are patched and fixed and pushed down, and not just get there, you know, you're not protected. And again, attackers and bad actors thrive on this information. So let's talk about the effect of ransomware on your office, because it's a little bit bigger scope than most people think it is. I always say this when we talk about, you know, especially Capital Pipeline. I believe they paid something in the neighborhood of $5 million to get their information back. That ransom is literally just the beginning of what you have to go through, because even if you paid the ransom and even if you get your information back, you still have to report that to the government that you had an attack. And at that point, a couple of things are going to happen. Number one, they're going to send a forensic cyber team in to find out how the breach happened, because even if we paid it and even if you got your info back, we still need to know how it happened, because if they did it once, they're going to come back. And I assure you, they're not paying for that. You are. Absolutely reputation damage and potential customer loss. If I know that I was a part of a breach and maybe my information was stolen, I may not be very comfortable coming back to your office. Once it's discovered, you now start incurring fines for the patient, and that is basically you know, they come to that by what they call willful negligence. Were you doing what you were supposed to do? Were you doing your reporting? Were you doing your patching? Were your systems out of date? And I assure you, the last thing that anybody really wants is to be at the will of the government when it comes to their arbitrary idea of what they're going to fine you. Once that's discovered, you are most certainly going to have to pay for credit monitoring and protection and credit repair. And that's, so the average loss to a business of your size, or the average business, is roughly $178,000. So even if that ransom was 5, 10, 15, 20,000, it's just the tip of the iceberg for what you have to pay for and what you have to start to recover. I always go with some, because the question that inevitably always gets asked is, well, how do I know I'm going to get my information back if I pay my ransom? And this slide right here is going to affirm why you will, because this is a business. This is a business to the tune of $20 billion in paid ransom last year. That's just paid ransom. That's not including, you know, anything that was incurred by the victim after that. So I assure you, it would be a bad business model if a ransomware company, which is basically what they are at this point, was known for not giving you your money back. Eventually you would just not pay it and they would go out of business. So you will get your information back. This is a business, and this is a growing business. So how do ransomware attacks happen? There's a couple of different ways. First and foremost, and probably the most popular, is it comes in the form of something called a phishing email. And we've probably all received these, where it says, you know, dear customer, or dear valued client, or dear user. You know, there is a problem with your account. It requires attention. You have to click here to fix it. An even more advanced version of this is something we call spear phishing, where they actually know your first name. So in my case, they would address something like, you know, dear Richard or dear Rick, your account is in trouble and you need to contact us. So they are getting more sophisticated. The national average is about 65%. I'd almost say it's more to the tune of 80 to 85% that these attacks actually happen from somebody clicking an email in your office. Most attacks do occur in a Windows-based environment. So, you know, Windows model is, we'll put an operating system out there and then we'll wait for feedback and then we'll fix it as we get feedback. That unfortunately makes Windows open to a lot of vulnerabilities. So it's just much easier to exploit than, say, something like an Apple environment or a Mac environment. Most of these attacks happened where the antivirus and the anti-malware were 100% up to date. And the reason that is because these come in the form of email. So they've already made it through your firewall, they've already made it through your systems, and they've now arrived at what we call one of your endpoints, which could be a PC, it could be a server. And then back to the first one, most attacks happen because somebody clicked an email. Somebody saw there was a package available, or there was an issue with Citibank. And we're going to cover some of these examples now and a little bit later in the presentation as well.
Hey, Rick, can I interrupt for 1 second if that's okay?
Of course.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to do, and I wanted to make sure I put this out early, is we want to get an understanding of our audience today, because Rick wants to really kind of, when we get to some of these details, focus on who we're speaking to and get a better understanding of the audience. So I'm going to put a poll out to the group. It's completely anonymous, but it will help us understand, you know, are we talking to office managers? Are we talking to IT individuals? So I'm going to go ahead and put that out there. Rick, please continue with your presentation.
Absolutely. Okay, great. So here's an example of a phishing email. And, you know, I probably said this to myself. I know everybody does when we hear these stories on the news. And the question is, well, how can somebody click on this, or how can somebody fall for this? Well, you know, don't feel bad if you've ever been a victim of something like this, because these companies are getting very sophisticated in what they do. So this looks like an email from PayPal. This looks like something, oh, you know, oh, my PayPal account has been disabled. I need to restore it. And you can see pretty quickly, so there's a couple telltale things here. You can see the sender pretty quickly, and we're going to show you later how to identify that. Typically in an email body, they're not going to threaten you or send you something suspicious or be very vague. You will see things like bad grammar. I think we've all gotten used to that one, and we're going to talk about that later as well. And then we're going to talk about how to follow the link. So this is just a good example. It looks like PayPal. They've got a trademark in there. They've got a PayPal email ID in there. So it looks pretty official. Here's another one from USPS. And we'll just go through these pretty quickly. But hey, you know what? I didn't order a package, but maybe somebody sent me something. So this is something I want to click on. And before you notice, or before you know it, you've launched something. So I can make these say anything. I can make this look like anything. We're going to get into those examples later. And then finally, one from Amazon. there probably isn't. You could probably throw a stone and hit somebody who's done stuff with Amazon. I know that truck is probably at my house once a day, if not every other day. So, you know, sometimes we order so much from Amazon, you don't know what's coming and what's not. So this is becoming a popular one because it's especially during the pandemic, their business went through the roof. So we're going to go over how to cover all these, but these are just some of them. So again, if you've fallen for one of these, or you say, well, how can somebody fall for it? It's pretty easy because they're getting very sophisticated. So let's talk about, how do we recognize a threat, or how do we know that something might be happening? So what we talked about earlier, there's usually 4 telltale signs that you can determine if something is either a phishing email or something just doesn't look right. We're going to go through each of these. These are the 4, and then we'll go through each of the top. So I'm not going to roll down this slide.
Rick, I have the results of that poll real fast. Our audience is split
Sure.
primarily between practice owners and clinical team. So hygienists,
Okay, great.
and dentists, and then a smaller amount of office managers and IT individuals.
So this is absolutely geared towards what we want it to be. So that's great. Excellent. So first thing I always look for is the URL, or basically the address that something is coming from. Now this is from Facebook, looks good. Looks like I have an issue with my Facebook. I need to log in. This will probably be an active link, as well as if I forgot my password or create a new account, they're all going to go to the same place. The first thing I always look for is this HTTP. A company like Facebook, or a company like Citibank, or a company like Wells Fargo, or really any major company, is never going to send you something that doesn't say HTTPS. There's always going to be an S right here. That S stands for secure. And a lot of times you'll see a little lock up here in the corner too that's showing you it's a secure site. That means that company has taken the time to register that domain, to get an actual security token for it, to make sure that it's a secure transaction. The first thing you'll notice is if there's no S, it is not a secure site. Any major institution, any institution with any kind of credibility is never going to send you something that is not secure and doesn't have that S on it. So that's the first thing you can always look for. Bad from email address. So as we talked about earlier, I can make this say anything I want. I can make it say Bill Gates. I can make it say Amazon. I can make it say Microsoft. However, in order to route it, it has to be routed to an email address. In this case, this is from the United States Postal Service, and this is an actual email that I received, so I only use live examples. All you really need to do is double click on the email address, and it's going to bring up exactly who it's from. So even though the title is USPS, or United States Postal Service, it's actually from RIBrit.NoReply 3M FK FXE. So clearly that is not the United States Postal Service. And you know, they're not going to send you something from a Gmail address. They're not going to send you something from a USPS.AU or .EU or .AD address. It's not going to happen. They're going to send it from USPS.com. So that's the second way that you can look for it. This one I think is a pretty easy one. I think we've come accustomed to this over the years, whether it was the email we received where we had, you know, a prince in another country that wanted to give us money, or even if, you know, the Social Security office is emailing us and telling us they're going to come and get us. It's pretty easy to figure out when there are grammatical errors and there are errors with the language, that it's probably not a real email.
Hey, Rick,
I can assure you,
us a favor?
like,
there's a dialog box in the bottom of your screen that's blocking.
Sure.
Yeah, if you just move that over to the left a little bit on your end. I don't want to. Yeah. No, forget it. It says where you're stop sharing your screen. You know what? Just forget it. I don't want to hold up your presentation.
That's all right. Yeah, I apologize. Okay. So yeah, misspellings, poor grammar, and then call to action or any kind of threat of consequence. So a company like Citibank or Wells Fargo or Facebook or Netflix or whoever it might be, is not going to threaten you directly in their email. They're not going to tell you they're going to revoke your account. They're not telling you they're going to fine you large sums of money. They're not telling you the police are coming. That is what we kind of call a scare tactic. And they're not going to do that. They may say your account requires attention, or they may say that there's an issue that needs to be resolved, but they're never going to tell you things like you're going to be suspended, the cops are coming to get you, or we're going to revoke your account, or we're going to revoke your social security number. It's not going to happen. So what are the ways that my practice will know that it's been infected? First thing to understand here is let's say you go into your office tomorrow, or even go into your office or back to your office after this call, and you go to access maybe a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet or something that you use, and you realize that every time you click on that file, nothing happens, or it's spinning, or a window opens up, but you can't see anything. That might be the first sign that, and you could check a couple, because it may just be your Word document at that point or whatever, but if you notice that you can't get a lot of your files, that could be a problem. You may actually get a warning, and we're going to show you a couple examples here. You may actually get a warning on your screen of file lock and saying that this cannot be accessed, you've been infected, and then there's instructions. You may also get a countdown clock that says you now have this much time, and we're going to show you that as well. You may open a window, and then from that window, 35 or 40 other windows open simultaneously, and you can't control it. That could be an issue. I think we've all seen that happen in the past. You may also see that everything works fine, but when you go to access your files, it's going to have, every file is going to be listed as maybe something like a extension like this, where no matter what you click, if this used to be called customer list, it's now going to be called how to decrypt files.txt, or decryption instructions.html. And you'll see every single file looks like that. Here's an example of CryptoLocker, which was a major disruptor a couple of years ago and still continues to cause problems today. And this was essentially when somebody logged in, this was all you saw. You couldn't see your files, you couldn't get to anything, you couldn't open anything, you had a countdown clock. This is WannaCry. This is another one that again is still wreaking havoc today, and Windows is still putting out updates today for. This has a countdown clock. This gives you instructions, and this actually gives you the link where you can upload and pay your Bitcoin ransom. In this case, they wanted $300 at the time in Bitcoin. That was in, I believe this was 2017. So enter this, check your payment, and get your decryption keys. So let's say you now have an attack and you are infected. What do we do? So we basically have what we consider the four-step process. And this is involving you, and this is going to involve your IT company. So we're going to go through each of these individually. Number one, disconnect in all forms. Now, when I say disconnect in all forms, unplug your wired devices. When we say unplug your wired devices, we essentially mean find out where the network cable connects to your PC or your computer under the desk, or if it's an all-in-one, it's in the back, but find out where it is and unplug that cable. Don't try to shut your machine down. If you think you know where the power cord is, you can certainly yank the power cord and kill the power. I would not do that on a server, but I would do that on a PC. But we want you to unplug everything. Reason being, if you try to shut down, the way that ransomware works, it may actually prevent your PC from shutting down so it can run itself. When you activate a ransomware file on your PC, you have roughly 17 to 20 seconds to stop it. And the best way to do it is to unplug that network wire, because once it gets out of your PC into the rest of the network, it starts to spread and it goes to your server and your backups. Even if you went to your internet connection and disconnected it at that point, it doesn't matter. It's already inside of your network. Your network to communicate internally does not need your internet router anymore. It only needs your switch. So what I always say is after this call, go back to your office, familiarize yourself with your environment, with your PC, where your switches are, where your server is, and disconnect everything. That means go around to every PC, every server, unplug everything from the switch, unplug your switch from the wall. Don't unplug your server. We don't want you to do that. Just pull out the network cord to your server so it can't communicate anymore. Disconnect all your wireless devices. If you have access points or you have little Wi-Fi routers or repeaters or anything like that, pull them out of the wall, disconnect them, get rid of them. If you can, and hopefully we've isolated it, determine what workstation it started from if we know. So when we start to talk to the IT company, we know where to start. Do not, whatever you do, if it's been unleashed, and at that point, do not, and you've already disconnected, do not run any cleanup programs. Don't run any antivirus or malware or any kind of scanning program because you could do a lot more damage. And do not erase anything. If you erase those encrypted files, you may not be able to get them back and you may not be able to recover them. So do not erase anything. So just unplug and stop. That's all we want you to do. Your part is done there. At that point, you're going to call your IT company. You're going to call your person that does IT. Maybe it's somebody in the office themselves that does IT. But at that point, your work is done. At that point, your IT company is going to take over. And then they effectively have to determine the scope. What was damaged or what was infected? Are there any shared drives? Is there any network storage? Any local backup drives? Most importantly, any USB or portable drives. And here's what I mean. If you have a USB stick that's connected to your PC and you're saving things there, and this attack happens, and you unplug that drive and you forget about it, and then your company goes through the whole process of decrypting everything, cleaning the PCs, reinstalling your environment, and then you go ahead and you forgot about that USB drive and you plug it back in, you are going to instantly reinfect your entire network. So you really have to be conscious of what was connected to that network. Portable, backup, USB. You may have to notify your cloud storage if you're using something like Dropbox or OneDrive or G Drive or anybody you work with in the cloud. You may have to notify them that you had a ransomware attack just to be safe on their side. Chances are most of these companies have their own mitigation and it won't be affected, but you still need to go ahead and confirm all of those, and your IT company is going to help you do that. But you really need to have an inventory of what was connected, because the way ransomware works, anything that was connected, anything that has any kind of memory available in it that can store information is going to have those files and it's going to reinfect. Your IT company has to determine the strain. Is it brand new or do we know it? Are there decryption keys available, or is this something we've never seen before? And that's really going to determine how we go from there. So if it's something like CryptoLocker and there are available decryption keys out there, maybe we could decrypt it. Maybe it was just something that was old, that was no longer active. So there certainly is that possibility. Or if it's something we've never seen before, then we kind of know what we're dealing with, because at that point, there's nothing out there and it's an active attack. Finally, once we've determined all this and once we've got everything locked down and ready to go, we're going to kind of evaluate how we're going to do or what we're going to do. Hopefully, your IT company or your IT person or you were doing your backups correctly, and we'll be able to take that backup and restore you, reinstall your machines and get you back up and running. That's the best case scenario. You can certainly attempt to run a third-party decryption program. With the best, probably the 4 best supercomputers on Earth, it would take you 13 billion years to decrypt whatever encryption algorithm was put on your PCs. There's no way around it. Another option, believe it or not, is do nothing. As a lot more people start to move to the cloud and start to use more cloud-based practice management and cloud-based imaging, a lot of your local stuff may just be Word documents or maybe a marking list or an Excel spreadsheet, and it may not be that valuable to you or something that you can easily recreate. So quite frankly, you can very well do nothing. You clean your PCs, you go back to business, everything's in the cloud, and you're good to go. So that is an option. Or sometimes the path of least resistance is to negotiate and pay the ransom. And like I said, there are other things with that. But to get your business back and running the quickest, this is the way to do it. However, if you do that, you still have to have your IT company or somebody other than cyber investigators find out how it happened. because if they did it once, they'll do it again. If they got in once, they're going to get in the same way. So even if you pay the ransom, you still need to find out what happened and still need to close down that loophole on how they got in. So how do I protect myself from future attacks? All right, so this is kind of where we talk about some of the things that you can do, ranging from absolutely free and just requiring training to just, you know, asking your IT provider some pretty serious questions. Number one, we talk about create a multi-level plan, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about training your first line of defense, which is you and your staff. As we talked about, most of these come in through email, and most of these come in through a phishing email or a spear phishing email. If we can go through and make sure that we talk about some of the tips with your staff, we're going to mitigate 90% of these because we're not going to click on anything. Certainly deploy hardware and software-based protection, and then of course confirm your backups and disaster recovery. We're going to talk about that. So I always say your staff is your best deterrent. If you've got somebody in your office, maybe it's you, maybe it's you know, maybe it's your kid that loves tech. Make somebody a cybersecurity czar. There are certainly blogs out there. There are certainly sites that you can go to kind of see what is what's hot. For instance, over the past few months, and it's dying down now, but starting in January, the big thing were COVID vaccine email scams, where you would get an email and it looked like it was from CVS or from maybe you know, Hackensack Meridian or one of those, or whoever your local hospital provider is, saying, "Hey, good news, Rick, your appointment is ready for your vaccine." And at the time, people were, you know, there was such a frenzy to get the vaccine that sometimes in that frenzy, you'll throw caution to the wind and just click on that link because it looks good. And that's what these guys, you know, that's what these ransomware companies, they rely on that. They rely on emotion and playing on your emotions. That's why there's always threats, and that's why there's always, you know, a fear of consequence if you don't act. For instance, a year ago, it was PPP loans. You know, right about this time when you guys were shut down, and you know, you were trying to make sense of how you were going to secure those loans. Well, phishing emails popped up all over the place. Hey, you know, get your PPP loan now. We'll make it easy for you. So there's always going to be kind of a flavor of the month, and these guys act on it pretty quickly. In November, there were 100 registered domains for COVID vaccine scams. By the end of February, there were over 750 registered domains pushing out COVID vaccine scams. So it happens that quickly, and these guys build it up that quickly, and then they move on to the next thing. You can deploy simulated attacks in your office, and there's ways to do that. And just, you know, develop smart cybersecurity practices. So just, again, training your staff, knowing what to look for, knowing what not to look for, having a plan, right? If you have a ransomware attack, and even the best case scenario, your information was in the cloud and it's safe and you're good to go, you still have to be prepared to be down for at least 2 or 3 days. So not only should you have a plan in case this happens, and you know what to do and what to unplug and what to look for, but your plan should be, how are we going to operate if we have an attack and we have to be down for 3 days until our information is restored? So these are the things you have to start thinking about. And it doesn't really cost money to think about these things. It's more just preparedness. And, you know, it never fails to get some of these tips and tricks and certainly hang them up somewhere. Put them out by the front or out where somebody's using a PC. Hey, these are the things to look for. Hey, if you see something suspicious, you know, go ahead and don't click it. So this is, I promise you, if you train your staff, you're going to mitigate yourself. You're going to mitigate the chances of this by at least 80 to 90%.
So Rick, real quick, I just want to encourage you. We've got some good questions. We've got questions coming in through the chat feature and Q&A. Please try to use Q&A so we can get to them all. Rick, this is about a 10 or 9 minute warning for you, and then we're going to go into the Q&A. So more questions.
Got it. Perfect. No, we're good.
Great.
Excellent. Okay. So yeah, of course, you need a hardware-based firewall. You should have that. It should be updated. It should be looked at regularly. There should be certain things turned on in it, and your IT provider should know how to do that. Most email solutions now, like Outlook and G Suite, come with anti-spam and anti-phishing. So it's never bad to turn those on, and you can easily turn those on inside of each of those. If you're using something like free Gmail or something like that, they have that too, but it's not as robust. Certainly, you still need your antivirus malware or your anti-malware and your antivirus software. We still want you to have that because ransomware can come in through malware. And we're going to talk about that in tips and tricks in just a couple of minutes. This one might be a little high level, DNS and content filtering software. So your firewall, we can actually train your firewall, put things in your firewall to start to look for things that look like ransomware. And that's kind of where this whole industry is going. Endpoint protection software, which is kind of what we talk about with your antivirus, and then endpoint detection response. And there is actually now anti-ransomware software that is artificially intelligence-based software that actually learns your behaviors and then can spot a ransomware attack and cut off your network card. And we can certainly talk about that after the meeting. Confirm your backups. You should always have an on-site backup. It's the quickest way to restore somebody. And then not only that, but you should also have a segregated off-site backup, which is monitored. Both backups should be monitored. Were they backed up? What time were they backed up? Is the backup complete? Did it fail? Are there clusters missing? These are conversations that you should be having with your IT company. Plan on the worst case scenario. Plan on the fact that something bad is going to happen. Now, hopefully it never does, but that doesn't mean we don't want to be prepared for it. So the best practices we have, and I've said this a few times and I'll say it again, vet your current IT company or your provider or the person who does this, especially when it comes to your cloud backups. Where are my backups? Are they protected? Because all the cloud really is a server somewhere, sitting somewhere not in your office. Okay, so if I'm your IT guy and your cloud server is in my garage and I say, yeah, I've got an offsite backup, you're good to go. Well, if my garage goes up in flames, your backup goes up in flames. So is it protected? Is it in a secure location? Is it in a data center? Who can access that data center? Is it sitting in your office where somebody can walk into the server and kick it and disrupt the backup? You know, how many people can get access to that server? Is there fire suppression? Is it temperature controlled? These are all the things you need to be asking about your backup. We talked about appoint a cybersecurity czar, something great to do. If you want to write this down, and we'll talk about it again, healthitsecurity.com. Great site to go to. You get daily updates on all the stuff that's happening with health IT and really around security and ransomware and stuff that you can do.
Rick,
healthitsecurity.com.
Why don't you put that in the chat for everybody, if that's okay?
Sure. Absolutely. I will. I always say this, if you think it's suspicious, don't open it. Forward it to your IT provider. You're never going to hurt your IT provider by forwarding them an email. You say, hey guys, this just doesn't look right. And hopefully your company will get back to you pretty quickly and say, you know what, it's ransomware. We're going to block the sender. Don't worry about it. If you think it's something that might be a concern, whether it's Wells Fargo or Citibank or any account that you deal with, call the institution. If Wells Fargo sends you an email and says, hey, listen, your account is in jeopardy, we're going to close it, you have to click this link, call them. They'll tell you pretty quickly, no, we didn't send that email. This is a common scam. Please send us the sender. And they do that quite a bit. If you don't do this today and you have one in your office tomorrow, everybody connects to the guest network. If you don't have a guest network, please establish one and have everybody connect to it. That includes yourself, that includes your staff, that includes patients. The only things that should be going over your secured or production network are anything with patient data, iPad check-ins, credit card readers, iTero machines. Anything that's moving patient data is the only thing, especially if your staff uses Android phones. Your Android phone should not be connected to your secured network. And we can answer that in the chat afterwards. Avoid freeware. I know it's, it looks great. Hey, I got this MP3 converter. If it's free, don't use it. I promise you, if it's freeware, it's malware. And it may not even be malicious malware. A lot of malware they give you for free, and all they're doing is collecting your data and your browsing habits, and then that company takes that data and sells it. The problem with it slows down your PC because it's constantly scanning everything you do. Password complexity or password keeper. Listen, I get it, guys. We've got a million things that we log into at this point. bank accounts, personal bank accounts, practice management, Facebook, Netflix, all the things that we remember. And I know it's really easy to hit that Google remember my password link, but I promise you, get yourself a password keeper. If you don't want to use a password keeper, and please don't use the same password for everything, but if you do want to use the same password for everything, a great trick is to use a movie quote or a song lyric or something that you can remember easily. Spaces, commas, punctuations, numbers, the bigger it is, the harder it is to crack. If you are currently using Firefox or Mozilla in your office, get rid of it. Riddled with vulnerabilities, riddled with malware, and riddled with constant security problems. Avoid using personal machines from home. Short-term work is fine, but if you have a long-term worker, do yourself a favor and buy them a laptop. You know, it's only going to serve you in the future. The problem is because if I'm logging into the office on the same machine that my kids are playing games on, I don't know what they've downloaded. They could download Minecraft. I mean, my kids play that forever. And along with that comes all things. And somebody could put a keystroker in your system and easily get into what you have. If you were going to use something like that and you're logging in remotely, use two-factor or multi-factor authentication. So even if somebody has your password, if they don't have your phone, they're not going to get that second level of encryption. Most use Google Authenticator at this point. If you're using a free version of LogMeIn or a free version of something like remote access, please, I beg you, pay for it and turn on two-factor. And then find a good blog or newsletter. And we will put the blog in the comments when we're done. And that's it. We're done.
Well, I don't want you to think it's a race, man. It's not a race. It's not a sprint. This is awesome.
No, we're good. We're good.
We've got some good questions here that have come up in the feed. And I want to encourage people. This is not, I know your cameras are off. And Rick, if you want to put up your contact information, if you want to go ahead and find a slide, that would be great. I don't know if you've got one in your deck there that has your contact info.
I do.
So why don't you leave that up and keep sharing that so people have a way to follow back up with you.
Got it.
And then while you're doing that, so real quick, what the first question is, I don't want to give you too many things at once. Like when my wife throws two things at me, I can't do them both. And I don't know if you can multitask. So do you
no, that depends.
But why don't you take a second to go ahead and get your contact info up, if that's all right, or type it into a slide?
Sure.
If someone's already asked about that.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I'm just going to upload up for you here.
Okay. So the first question, I'll articulate this, is what are some good, it comes from Stacy, what are some good antiviral programs for home, and how can you tell, which one is legit? What are some good kind of like gating mechanisms to know if it's a legit offering?
So I mean, anything that you're paying for is it's typically a pretty decent program. One that I really like to use is it's called WebRoot, and it's a very robust system. It's very easy to use. I think even the basic one comes with like 3 or 4 users. That's a good one. Trend Micro is a good one.
You cut out there for a second. What's the name of the program? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. WebRoot, WEBROOT.
Okay.
And you can, that's a good one. The paid for. There are free versions, but try to use a paid for version. They're not crazy expensive. Trend Micro has another one that's really good. And even the paid version for your home PCs, even the paid version of Malwarebytes is good. But do yourself a favor and spend the money.
Appreciate that. Yeah, thank you for answering that. Rick, you got to do one thing on your end. You got your little sharing your screen box that's right over your email address.
Okay.
Show us how tech savvy you are, and just move that little box that says Zoom is sharing your screen to somewhere else so that people can see your email when you go back into the presentation mode. While we're waiting for Rick to do that, I had a couple questions. The CE code is going to be presented here. We're committed to going to full hour, so we have about 6 or 7 more minutes left of Q&A. And then if people want to remain on, once we give you your CE code, you're free to go. You're not going to be held hostage. Like Jeff was telling me he was on vacation in Cancun and he took one of those tours of the timeshare and they wouldn't let him leave. That's not what we do here, but we're gonna have an opportunity to learn more about HCI and CareStack at that point. So I just put a poll out there to the group. Okay, next question here comes from Glenn. What aspects of the in-office system should use two-factor authorization, and how is that implemented?
So when you want to use two-factor, a lot of that really applies to, and there are things that do it, but a lot of that really applies to when you are going from outside your organization into it. So if I'm working from home, or maybe, I'm working from an iPad and I have something like Log Me In, or, or really any other program, that's where we want to utilize two-factor authentication. When you're inside of your network, you're behind your firewall. Now, there are other things, maybe like if you're using something like cloud-based practice management software, or maybe something you're going out to your bank account inside of your practice, most things enable two-factor. So you can enable it that way, but where we really stress two-factor is when you're going from outside of your environment into your environment. So if I'm at home, I'm logging in at night, maybe I'm doing some notes, maybe I'm doing some billing, I want, and Google Authenticator usually does it, but most like I know for our clients, we use Enterprise Log Me In, and we force two-factor on them. And I know that sounds terrible, but it's, we provide them a link, we show them how to do it, and we show them how to set it up. Most things will show you how to enable two-factor authentication. It's usually just a click of a button, and then they'll take you through the process. But that's really more from going from the outside in.
Thank you, appreciate that. I got a couple more questions here, and I just put Rick's email address into the chat because he can't figure out how to move the dialog box. Rick, I'm gonna needle you for life on it. So I just put that into the chat box. It's okay.
Our internal firewall is wreaking havoc right now, so I don't know why the functionality is limited.
Maybe Dan Hall from CareStack is trying to put an attack on you. He's been known to do that every once in a while. So we talked. There's a question about cyber insurance, and I don't know. We didn't get into it,
okay.
Really, but this participant's asking about what will cyber insurance cover, and if you could speak to that for a moment.
Yeah, and I can actually speak to that from a real life example. Thankfully not for me, but somebody that we're actually working with right now. So when we talk about, when we talked about the slide earlier where we said that the ransom, the ransom you pay is just the tip of the iceberg. So what cyber insurance is designed to cover is typically not only the ransom itself, but all of the damages that you might incur from that attack. So when the forensic investigators have to come in and find out what happened, when you have to start credit monitoring or credit repair, when you have to, maybe help somebody get out of bankruptcy, because it's all going to go within that. Those are things, all those ancillary charges are all covered. And obviously it's policy depending. I'm not an insurance salesman, but most policies are designed to cover all of those additional damages just beyond the ransom. So that's typically what it does.
Great, thank you for speaking to that. If there was an award for highest engagement, Glenn, you'd be the recipient of that award. So Glenn asked, if a ransomware attack is suspected, what is the time frame to disconnect from the system? And would disconnecting the power to the network switch prevent the spread? So yeah, you've got about 20 seconds. If within 20 seconds, I mean, hopefully, you can get to your switch in time. If you disconnect the power to the switch, that's going to stop anything from spreading throughout your network. But you've got about 17 to 20 seconds. So if you don't think you can get to your switch in time, the first thing you want to do is disconnect from the PC itself. However, if you think it's gone beyond that, get to your switch and just pull the power out of the wall. Cut your cables, do what you got to do. I assure you, to re-terminate a cable, it's much cheaper than to pay for a ransomware attack. Okay, good stuff. This is a great engaged audience, not like the last course that we did. So good stuff. This is a reflection on you, Rick. Imagine if you had your camera on, it'd be even better engagement. Okay. Here's the next question. This comes from Steve in the audience. And he said, you know, how does my, am I a candidate for ransomware if I make the switch from being on-premise software? And he used the example of Dentrix. If I move to something in the cloud, how does that change my ability?
Good question. Great question. There is no doubt, and the data supports it, that, you know, moving to a cloud-based system is certainly going to insulate you a bit. Now, I will caveat that with, of course, who that cloud provider is, right? So somebody like Dentrix, or, you know, somebody like CareStream, or even, you know, using, let's segue to OneDrive or Google Cloud or something like that. For the most part, you can trust that those companies have, or hopefully we assume they've done what they had to do and that they have the right infrastructure. From a liability standpoint, I don't quite know the legality behind it, because if the attack occurred in your office, and then from your office it jumped to the cloud provider and caused a disruption, I am fairly certain that that provider is going to come after you again. So you do, it's really going to come down to what your contract between you and your cloud provider states. Because I assure you, if somebody, and this isn't just, you know, isolated to Dentrix, but Microsoft or anybody, if they can figure out a way to blame you as to why their systems were infected, they're going to do it. And I assure you, their base of lawyers is much stronger than anybody else's. So from a data standpoint, good way to go. From a liability standpoint, you know, read your agreement.
Okay, I think we have time for like 2 quick questions. This is from an audience member, Joanne. Why do you think dentists are targeted as ransomware in your professional opinion?
Well, I mean, let's be honest, especially in the United States, you know, doctor equals money, right? Doctor equals money. Whether people believe that's true or not, I mean, that's what's out there, and especially for how other countries perceive the United States. And number 2, just kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, a dentist, more than anybody, you know, you're probably the only offices, or just about the only offices, that have your imaging and your practice management and any kind of scanning. It's all done in your office, right? If I go to my medical doctor, he's going to send me, or he or she's going to send me to a radiology center or another center to get my x-rays, right? Chances are they don't really do them in the office anymore. So you guys are still kind of the last of the survivors that still do everything in your office. So with that comes very complex, multiple ways of how this all has to connect. So your practice management has to talk to your imaging. Your imaging has to talk to your sensors. Your cameras have to talk to your imaging. And they all have to talk to each other. And to make that work, sometimes they have to go outside to get back in, because certain things are reliant in the cloud, certain things are you know, reliant on working with outside stuff. And if the more things you have to update, the more potential holes you have. It's just like, I always equate it to a house, right? If you have your house and you lock your windows and your doors, that's one thing, okay? But if I break a window or I crack a door, I'm in. Now, if I have a house, but I add an alarm system, now I add another layer. Now, and if I add cameras, now I add another layer. So, but these are all now things that I have to make sure work and are working and do what they're supposed to be doing. So the more layers you add, the more complexity you have, the more you have to update things, because there's always vulnerabilities. There's always vulnerabilities discovered.
Rick, thank you so much. I know if I go any longer without giving the CE code, people are going to ask for my home address and show up here. So I'm going to provide that here. The one thing I'll just add in conclusion, and I can speak on the behalf of what we hear in the marketplace at CareStack, is that dentists are also targeted because you guys pay. You pay the ransoms, so they go back to the well.
Absolutely.
Right? That's another piece. Like,
absolutely.
But just call it what it is. All right. So here is your code. This is, trust me, this is not the password that I use for my computer. It took me days to think of this, but you've got to go log back into your CE Zoom portal and enter in the code ransom 2021. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat feature for everybody. It's ransom, the word ransom, no space. It can be lowercase or uppercase, and then 2021. So we did a poll a moment ago, Rick and Jeff. About 45% of the people are asked to remain on to hear more about HTI and CareStack. But if you're that guy like Jeff, you land in Cancun, you got the Birkenstocks on, the cargo shorts, you're ready to hit the beach, sign up for the, to go look at the timeshare, and then you feel like, oh my God, I got hosed. You can go now. You don't have to stay. Ransom 2021 is the code. Go back into CE Zoom, log in there. If you want to hear more about the courses that CareStack and Darby do in the future, please go to Facebook and join the CareStack Champions group. That's where we have information on our, our CE cycle. I'd ask you to go join there. That's where you're going to hear information. So thanks everyone. Appreciate your time today, and we'll see you again here soon.